Let's move on to a topic that we have to cover because we're talking about a regulated industry, which is healthcare compliance and mandates that are legislated are a huge component of anything you are going to do in healthcare security. If we think about recent legislation in Massachusetts as well as in New York, they were the most recent states to pass healthcare workplace violence prevention legislation. You had mentioned workplace violence earlier. So I'm curious to get your thoughts about how this factors into what you do and what can hospitals expect in those states, how to respond with technology.
Okay, good one. As far as what that means, one, I agree with it. Let's begin there. I agree with it. I think we're roughly at maybe 11, 12 states now have some form of legislation, federal legislation that's
Mm,
been passed, but it's not fully executed into law yet. I'm excited about it because that brings awareness. States that are taking this a very serious thing, that brings awareness. And again, that takes it away from just generically hospital security, but frame it as workplace violence. And they are specifically calling out the people that matter most and that none of us will escape: healthcare. That's what this legislation means. And then what does that mean to the organizations? Every state has different things that they write up. Some of these legislation is about firmer enforcement. If you commit a crime, that's on healthcare. So it's about firmer enforcement or being very clear about the enforcement there. But the majority of them are somewhere along the lines of requirements for hospitals, health networks. You must do security assessments. You must have a
mm,
workplace violence plan in place.
mm,
But what that tells the hospitals, health networks that are going to operate in Illinois is we take this seriously. And
mm,
the other side of this is potentially legal action. The other side
mm,
of this is labor disputes, like what we're seeing in New York earlier this week. There's a strike.
mm.
That legislation is new in New York, but there's always some bargaining that's happening. And so it was time for the New York Nurses Union to bargain, and they absolutely called out workplace violence prevention. It was one of their three core things that they were asking for. Signals that the state and soon federal government is taking workplace violence in healthcare seriously. It does mean different things in different states depending
Sure.
upon the legislation, but it's very common. Assessments have to be done. It's going to point out all types of ups and downs in your governance, risk, and compliance. Another thing is going to be incident management,
Mm,
reporting,
mhm.
anti-retaliatory tactics.
So you need to be able to go back in your system and quickly find the data that shows one thing or another in terms of identity, in terms of access capabilities, paint the picture of what was done in order to either mitigate or help prevent these type of incidents from happening, correct?
Absolutely. When it comes to auditing, to be able to go back and monitor access, who did what.
Mhm.
Paul Sarnese told me about a situation he's seen in his past. Former president of ISSS, a great consultant now doing a lot of workplace violence assessments. He said he's had all the three-letter organizations coming through facilities. Real life example is when it comes to auditing, there was some type of lab that should have had roughly 50 people with access. That
Mhm.
lab had over 1,000. There's real things at stake here. And going back to Paul's example, it had to do with drugs. It had to do with some kind of case that made its way all the way into all the three-letter organizations.
Mm.
They need to know who was where, when, and there's some facilities that are not prepared for that answer, and that's
That's
going to
right.
be much more painful for some facilities than others.
Yeah, in terms of that automation, that's one of the things that we've always focused on, even when it comes to compliance and auditing perspective. It makes a huge difference when you're able to run those reports, get that data in minutes and hours rather than days and weeks, and be able to quickly put that together. That helps the security team feel enabled, but also when there is an investigation, you can put that together. One last thing I would say is the example you use in terms of too much access to a secure facility or secure area. That's one of the things that we focus on from a PIAM perspective is the access creep that tends to happen to do access recertification and be able to look at that periodically, but automate it to say, are you sure you want all these people to have access? This has changed from month to month and year to year.
Just
Have a
think
look at
about
the
role
role
change.
changes, facility changes. Our CEO, Jasper Gillo, says, no one ever comes to you as an employee and says, can you reduce my access, please? I think I have too much, right? Just gaining access until you have keys to the entire kingdom. So
That's how you end up with 1,000 people getting in the
that's
lab.
exactly. So you need a
Yeah.
system that can make you aware of these things. And so you can take action, hopefully beforehand. But if it gets to a point where you need to look back, a good way of doing it.
And that goes to a conversation you and I had earlier when we talk about underestimating integration automation, underestimating how this can improve their life, even when it comes to auditing. I have not had a conversation yet where they felt like their auditing was smooth and it was under control. It is such a painful process for some that it never gets done. And obviously, we won't name names or anything like that, but I have conversations where they say, "Hey, how's that process? How can we improve
Mhm.
it?" And their response is, "We do not do it. There is no level of auditing done." But
Investment.
that's a tough spot in healthcare. Auditing and compliance is a very tough spot in healthcare, and it's so tough for some that they're not doing it at all.
I remember we have this one customer and they were presenting at one of our events. And he said something to the effect of auditing before Alert Enterprise used to take a month. And it was not only difficult, it was demoralizing to the team because of how painful it was. It would demoralize the team because they knew how painful it was to go from system to system, get all the reports, connect the dots, and get it done. He said once they had Alert Enterprise, it took that painful month process to a few days to get it done. All of a sudden, you could see the morale of the team just go up and no one was dreading audit time. They could get it done quickly. They actually loved the fact that they could get insights from the data and understand that it was something that could improve their processes and workflows. And then they can get on with their jobs and do the things that they actually wanted to do. That ROI isn't necessarily always tangible in terms of money, although it is, because compliance and not being in compliance is going to cost you. But even just the team morale and the attitude to say, we don't need to be scared about auditing anymore. This tool that we have from Alert Enterprise actually just makes it a breeze.
Mhm.